Okay, hello to everyone and to all my viewers and Christians alike. Welcome to the Cornerstone podcast. I am welcome to be joined by Wes Sheley and Carrie Sheley. Little known fact about these two: these were my leaders for about 4 years at Pendleton First. Pastor Wes was my associate pastor, and uh, Carrie was his wife. She also
Still
worked
is.
in and yeah, she's all right. She just belongs to the ride. Um, she uh, she also worked in the in children's ministry as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I guess we can just jump right in because that's just how I work. Um, um, so like I said during the pre-interview, this podcast is about um sharing the individual testimonies of people that don't normally would normally get to. So, just briefly, what is your testimony? What's your guys' testimony? Just 5 minutes.
Yeah. So first of all, Michael, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this journey with you. And I think this is a great idea, just getting stories out there. And hopefully today we'll just encourage somebody. A little bit about myself. I grew up in a pastor's home. Both of my parents were ordained ministers with the Assemblies of God, and they both have passed away. But I was born in church, raised in church. But my experience as being a pastor's kid is a little bit different in the fact that my my parents were hurt in a church and ministry when I was just little, and so my upbringing was just how they jumped into and volunteered in church, and um, kind of oversaw some ministries within a mega church in Sacramento. My elementary years, and then my dad felt very strong of finishing his education and his degree, so we moved to Santa Cruz, going into my middle school years, and so to watch my dad in my teen years still continue to pursue his calling was, I think, pretty cool. I think as far as being raised, it was my senior year in high school. He became a pastor of a home missions church in Santa Cruz. Uh, my parents were just different, in allowing my sister and I to continue to attend the church that we were raised in, our youth group, and so forth. And so I would attend my dad's church, but I had my home church that I was still established with. But I watched my dad work 40 plus hours in a job, then go be the gardener, the janitor, the outreach pastor, everything. And so, yeah, my upbringing in that was just a little bit different. Now, for my call, I would say my original call in life to be a pastor, hindsight looking back, was probably when I was 6 years old at a Rich Wilkerson's crusade in Sacramento. And it was the first adult service that I remember paying attention to. I just loved his storytelling. And I remember after that service, I asked my dad if he would be mad if I became a missionary someday. And he goes, "No, son, I'd be proud of you." And I said, "Well, I don't want to be one of those missionaries that goes overseas and gets killed. I want to be Rich Wilkerson." Um, and it wasn't until later in life I look back, and I think that was my original call in life. I think from that point on, God just kind of had His hand of protection on my heart and on my mind, and just the way I was raised. Middle school, I was at a middle school camp at Mount Lassen, our Assemblies of God camp there. I was called to be a youth pastor. Kind of my high school years got really into the Christian music industry, as far as my sister was a concert promoter for Christian music. And so I was just in and around the Christian music, as far as like Newsboys and DC Talk and Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant, all of those. And I was there all day long for the load ins, all night for the load outs, really involved with sound engineer. I was a sound technician for our church, and I thought I was going to be in the Christian music industry with sound engineer, and I flew out to Nashville, Tennessee. Was looking at a college there. Already talked to a record company about being an intern there, and was already talking with a tour manager with the Newsboys of traveling with them on tour. And then God just knocked me upside the head and said, "What are you doing? I called you to be a pastor." And so I ended up in Texas shortly after that at Southwestern Guy University, which is now rebranded starting this year, Nelson University in Waxahachie, Texas. And went to school out there. Did not know anybody, never saw the school. Literally loaded up my car. My parents drove their car. I drove my car, and they dropped me off and left me there. And I didn't know anybody when I went out there. And it was definitely it was something that I needed in my journey of just being separated and figuring out my journey and my relationship and my call in my life just on my own. And it was just really good. But that's kind of where Carrie and our roads kind of met. And so, but yeah, I'll let her kind of share her story leading up to that.
So I as well am a pastor's kid. Actually, both my grandfathers were pastors in the Assemblies of God, and my dad is a retired Assemblies of God minister. He just got his 50-year pen as an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God this last year. So born in Tennessee, lived there for like 6 years, and then we moved to Oklahoma. And my dad was pastoring in Knoxville, and then we moved to Oklahoma when I was right before I turned 6, and teeny tiny town, and that's where my dad pastored until he retired. And my mom was a school teacher. She taught music, and she also taught special education. And I was a good kid. I mean, I was a church kid. I was born on a Wednesday and in church on Sunday. I didn't know anything else. But my mom, when I was in 8th grade, was diagnosed with breast cancer, had surgery, and things were great. Fast forward to my senior year, and it metastasized to her liver. And I got mad at God and just rebelled and spent my entire senior year grounded because of choices that I was making that were not great. Alcohol, other things that I should not have been doing. And so I lived my senior year grounded. And
to clarify for the viewers, the whole senior year, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Because that's what you said on Monday, so I wanted to clarify. Yeah, that was the whole...
Yeah,
so, yeah.
the whole thing. I might have had a week or two that I wasn't, but I don't really remember. I mean,
Probably Christmas and Easter.
I lost my car. My parents took my car away. They drove me everywhere. It was awful.
You were paroled on Christmas and Easter.
Probably not even then. So made a lot of bad choices. My mom, I graduated high school in May, and my mom passed away on August 7th. And I still wasn't living for God. I'd pretend on Sundays, or I'd pray for forgiveness on Sunday morning or Saturday night, so I didn't feel so bad on Sunday when I went to church. So yeah, but I chose a rough path. I was raised in a great home. I have wonderful parents. I grew up in Oklahoma, Bible Belt. It was a little strict, but still hindsight, I'm really grateful that I had the family that I did. But I'd say, like, a couple of summers later, God got a hold of my life, and I straightened up. He literally just ripped stuff out of me at camp. And I knew I was already in junior college, but I knew that he was calling me into kids ministry, and I needed to go. So I told my dad, and told him to lock the car because I told him in the car and I was afraid he might fall out of the car. But he knew what God was doing in my life. And so I completely turned my life around and headed to Southwestern, now Nelson University. And that's where we collided. Not right away. I thought he was a jerk.
Oh, really? You didn't?
Oh yeah. He was
West Coast culture meeting the Bible Belt culture. Our personalities are night and day. So our humor is just different. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So you weren't such a nice guy back then, but
no,
okay.
he was a nice guy. I just thought he was he was the California kid that, all the girls had ood and awed over, and it just annoyed the crap out of me. Sorry for saying that word, but they all just
I've said worse. It's okay. So, but Wes, you talked about doing background work for many famous Christian acts. I want you to go deeper into that. What did you learn from that experience?
Because when you show up to a concert and you're put to work, you're there to serve. All volunteer. It's long hours, heavy lifting. The enjoyment is you got a free concert. And sometimes it was being able to hang out with the artist and that kind of thing. So, the times that I did some load-ins and load-outs was with DC Talk, their Free At Last tour. But some of the things, just what I was able to get connected with, just because of my sister and who she worked for in the celebration concerts, just being a part of the startup of Spirit West Coast, and being a part of a music festival, but going out to like Nashville, Tennessee during the Dove Awards and that whole week, some of the artists that people watch or listen to that were and still are that are famous. I was there for some of these record companies sponsored lunches where they push these new artists that were coming out and perform during a lunch. And so good example is one of them is Katy Perry. She started off as a Christian music artist, and my sister has her original CD that we got out at Dove Awards. And, you would think it would be worth a lot, but it's not.
I heard it sucks too.
To be able to see that in some of those artists. But yeah, what I learned probably in all that is hard work does pay off. Like when you go and you do have a commitment, you follow through, and you excel in it. You always go above expectations. You're always going to be rewarded in one way or the other. It may not be through finances, but it may be through something else. Like, some of the autographs that I got, some of the concerts, being able to have meals, in a small group setting at some of these concerts backstage with some of these artists. Those are memories that you just don't, a lot of people don't have, but a lot of it was because of hard work and showing as a teenager, as a high schooler and, 17, 18, 19-year-old that I could be trusted, selling product, handling merchandise, that kind of stuff. It was fun. Yeah.
Good. So, both of your parents were in ministry in some capacity. I'd like for you guys to talk about what you learned from them. What did you learn from them the most as leaders? What did you take away from your parents?
My parents, as I mentioned, they were hurt when I was young. I hardly remember that church, but I do remember them jumping back into volunteer ministry. And my parents were really good at showing that people matter. You always put people first. And that's the fun side of ministry. There's a dark side of ministry when it comes to leadership and pastors and things that happen, accusations or people talk about the pastor, those kind of things. There's hardships, but that people matter. And my parents were really good of just ministry is just who you are. It's life. There's no clock in, clock out, and you just live life with people because you love people. For I think John Maxwell says it best is you see value in yourself, you see value in others, and we add value in others. And we do that. Doesn't matter who they are, what they believe. It's because God sees value in them. And I just I would say that's probably the main thing that I have found with my parents. They just did not judge anybody. They showed above and beyond grace, probably the grace that Jesus shows us. They're probably the best examples in my life of people who just had an open arm, open door policy and just love people unconditionally.
Carrie?
I'd say the love for people. My my dad too. They love people. They sacrifice a lot, personal time, to help people. My mom, I'd say this is where I get it. It's I never meet a stranger. I don't care if we're in the grocery store, the salad bar line, or, getting a drink at the water fountain at church. I will befriend you. I will probably know your story before we leave the foyer of the church. But just the love of people, to love people, to no matter what circumstances, whether good or bad, people are people, and they make mistakes, but we can still love them through it. My mom was always, love your enemies. And there was a situation that came up once where I told you before, my mom got this wonderful letter, or I shouldn't say letter. She got this wonderful birthday card from someone in the church. And inside of it was a letter that was just spewed such hateful things to my mom. And my sister was ready to go have words. And my mom was like, nope, that's not what we do. We love them. We kill them with kindness, and we heap coals of fire on their heads. And so I guess I adopted that practice. But most of it, I'd say it's just the love of people, to love people who they are, invest in them, speak love, speak life into them, share Jesus. Doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, what they smell like, but to show them Jesus no matter what, because my mom was known for her smile. And when she would smile, it was just kind of they knew you could see Jesus. She was just a beam of light and love of Jesus. And my dad was the same way. But my mom, it was like the smile. And that's just kind of the thing that stuck with me, that, they knew if anything, they could call my mom, they could call my dad, and you got prayer right then or whatever. But yeah, I'd say the things that I learned was to love people in all situations and all walks of life. It's just to love people.
That's awesome. A little thing I know about you, and something that we find in common, the three of us, we all have a disability or sickness of some kind. I'd like for you guys to take 10 minutes just to describe what each of yours is, and just for the viewers, and just how that's impacted you as a person, but as well as your ministry, individual ministries.
Yeah, let me start with mine. I always struggled in school. for me, C's were like A's, if I could just pass a class growing up. And I was never a good test taker. I hated reading. I was slow. In fact, when I was in elementary school, I had a speech therapist, and during the summer took reading, tutoring, and trying to speed up my words per minute type stuff. Um, and it wasn't until I was at Southwestern, my second semester, I barely made it through my first semester. And I was put on academic probation. And so I was like, okay, I goofed off too much. I was just having too much fun. And there's probably part of it. But I cracked down my second semester, and I remember studying for this particular test. You start off with all your syllabus, and I had them all marked down. From day one, I was on it and studying for this one particular test in a Bible class, and I knew the answers. I I knew the topic, everything, and aced all the study groups and stuff like that. Went into that test. I thought I aced it. I walked away just excited, and it was right after that found out that I had like a 30% on the test, and I remember just so defeated. And I called up my mom and I said, I think there's something wrong with me. And I think I have a learning disability. And she goes, really? She goes, she knew all my struggles. And so I decided to go to the counseling and psychology department and ask if they give learning disability tests. And they didn't. And so I called my mom up again, and she did some research and found a learning center in Santa Cruz, California, where we were living, where my parents were living. I was in Texas, but and scheduled for me to get tested. They said that they normally don't test that late as far as adults, So, but they figured out how to adjust some of their stuff. And I went in during spring break. There was a group of us. We created a kind of a missions trip, a road trip. We loaded up 3 cars, drove to California, and did some services for some churches. And then I spent all day Monday taking a test, like 8 hours, taking different tests. And then they called me up that night saying, hey, we forgot to give you one portion of the math test. I broke down in tears. I cried. I'm not joking. I was in tears. I was like, I do not want to go back. And, but I needed to know. I needed to know if I needed some answers. And so I went back the next day, took the test. And, I think the rest of us, for the rest of the day, just chilled on the beach, just to relax and that kind of thing. But it was about a week or 2 weeks later, got a call saying, yes, Wes, you do have a learning disability. You're dyslexic. And there was just a flood of emotions that came. Like I was angry that nobody caught it earlier, that I went all through my education thinking I was not smart enough, that I was just lazy, all the different excuses, just flooded. And I also had friends that were like, you know what, God could heal you. And I believed that. But then there was just this clarity one time, not too long after that, where I just kind of settled like, wait a minute, God created me. Like really starting to understand the form of dyslexia, because everybody with dyslexia is different.
Sure.
And it's not that it's a disability. We just learn in a different way than the majority of the people that are in the education system. And the education system is set up to teach to 80% of the students. There's 20% that just learn different. So I just learned that I picture everything. I picture every word, which has, for me, I discovered through my dyslexia that it's a gift, and it's helped me to communicate better. It's also kept me in line of realizing there's times when I know that if I'm struggling with dyslexia, when I'm preaching, then It's more of I'm struggling in my own self, not 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 speaking with the discernment and the clarity or having the Holy Spirit speak through me, if that makes sense. It's been kind of a pretty cool um, uh, accountability, as far as when I started struggling in speaking and preaching, I know that I'm kind of jumping onto that side of self and not leaning into what the Holy Spirit's trying to communicate to the listener. And so there's just a lot of really cool things that I've embraced in my learning disability. That it's who God has created me to be and have, and I've used it as a gift and developing that gift and understanding how to utilize that. Now, with that and how I approached it, it doesn't mean I didn't struggle in school because I did, but the more I understood, the more I used it to my advantage in my education to where, where I was almost flunking out of college. I ended up graduating I think, just over a 3.0. GPA, which is pretty cool. I hang that one. Just getting my diploma was a huge success for me.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed in February of 2000, so it's been 24 years, with multiple sclerosis. I was 22. We had only been married, excuse me, for 5 months. And I just woke up one day and my lip, like right over here, was going numb. And I thought, oh, I picked my lip. It's a bad habit. I've done it forever. And I was like, I'm using a new lotion. It got in there. And then it started to spread through my face and move down with my eye down to my arm. And went to a doctor. They just said I had a sinus infection. And I thought, I'm having a stroke. Like, there's no way. So did antibiotics for a little bit, and that didn't do anything. And so went back in, and by then I couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't walk straight. I couldn't see straight. So um, I left that day. They ran me through the MS sobriety test, touch your finger, touch your nose kind of thing, and walk a straight line, and that didn't happen. So we headed off. We lived in Southern California. We headed off to Bakersfield to have for me to have an MRI and to meet with a neurologist. And I was diagnosed pretty quickly with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And I know they can take it back to when I was like 18, 19. For something they thought I had carpal tunnel, but it was actually MS. And about then I would say I was relapsing like once a year. We left that church and moved in with his parents for a few months, 6 months, I don't know, something. Moved to Klamath Falls, Oregon to be youth pastors. And about we moved in September. That following June, our son was born. He's our little miracle, our first miracle. I had miscarriages before, and I had one over the summer before I got pregnant with him. And the medicine I was on, I had like a 98% chance of a miscarriage. So he was our 2%. He was called 2%, or the Gipper, because we didn't tell people I was pregnant for a long time, just in case anything happened. So after I had him, 6 weeks later, I relapsed, and I started having relapses, which are like things like not being able to, like, losing the use of a leg. One time I was numb from like just under like my chest all the way down. I couldn't feel anything. And so I was having things like that happen every 6 months, and then it moved to every 3 months. And it was it was really scary. We were young. We were in our 20s, and it just was a crazy, wild I don't even know how to really explain it sometimes because it was just so different. Like, it wasn't like my foot fell asleep and was going to wake up. It was like, no, my foot was just dead and it was not waking up. So I ended up doing some different treatments, different medications, and finally got to the point that nothing was working. So I was doing IV steroids every 3 months on top of the medication that I took for the MS, the one to stop the progression of the disease. And at that time, there were only like 3 drugs out. So I ended up in Reno at another neurologist. And because my neurologist was like, there's something coming. It's just not here yet, but we got to get you because if we don't, you will be a quadriplegic by the time you're 35. And I was like, oh, that's not that far away in the scope of things. So, I did different things to try and control and stop the disease. But it was just smoldering. It would never just fully ever go into remission. And then God called us onto the mission field as Youth Alive missionaries. And that was scary because my health is not good. Anytime Wes would leave to go on a trip, I would have a relapse. He'd leave for camp and he wouldn't leave, and I would be ready to go to camp and I would have a relapse and I would be in the neurologist's office like that day. So it was just, my body was just not, it was like literally, because it's attacking itself, but it was just going rapidly. Then an infusion came out that was amazing. And I took 1 dose that got pulled from the market. And then it came back out and I started back on it again. But we left for the mission field and we moved to Albany. We from Klamath Falls to Albany. And between, I think, being obedient and the IV I was taking, I didn't have another relapse for
It's like 8.5 years.
7 years when I had to change medications, and I relapsed then. So I mean, I've had several after, but not as many. But yeah, you become the poster child for every prayer meeting. Somebody's always got a word for you, which are not always bad. I've had some wonderful words from the Lord from people. And people have prayed for me and placed their hand on a certain spot on my body that they wouldn't have known at all if it wasn't for the Lord. Now I've had the other ones where you're like, oh, thank you.
That may have come from God, but it may be a little G God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you get it, Michael, and you're, when all of a sudden I show up to church and I'm having to use a cane or I'm in a wheelchair, it gets a little obvious and people are like, oh no. And it's like, really, I'm okay. I can't walk really well today, but I'm really okay. But you kind of become that poster child.
Right. And it's funny, you led right into my next question. What would you like to say to the believers in general as leaders, but also as leaders that have struggles? How would you like to talk to them about healing and how to implement healing? How should a layman best demonstrate healing and prayer?
It's a fine line. Because I've had people come up and, pray aggressively and like physically, and that hurts so bad. And it's like, oh, maybe if you could just gently touch me, or, it just because it says lay hands on someone doesn't mean that you need to be like, and if God has given you a word, really, really pray and make sure that it's the Holy Spirit that needs that to be said, because things that can be said and be so far off in left field that it literally just sends you spiraling because you're like, I don't even know anything, like, no, like God, I don't have any of those things.
We know.
Okay. And people, sometimes they don't realize, like, they don't see healing that's already taken place. They don't see the fact that just because help.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times we approach healings with the mindset that healing needs to be a certain thing in a certain way, So for like Carrie, for example, her healing has to be that MS is completely gone.
Not that it's been silent for years.
That has been silent, or she's not in a wheelchair anymore. She's not walking with a cane anymore. Those kind of things, like sometimes, or even like the healing that has taken place because of MS and the journey that we've been on. Like we have 2 kids that are miracles.
Yeah.
We have people that are in our lives and we've been able to relate to because of the journey that we've walked through. That's healing, and so it's perspective. Like just because we want to, and trust me, we haven't given up on the physical healing. We believe in that. Same with dyslexia. I believe in that. But in the day that we are in today, this is what we are walking in this moment. So we live in the moment. So I would say for people who have that desire to pray, I would say probably something that doesn't, when we are put in that position of we're going to pray for Carrie and her healing, a lot of times the ones that are forgotten, what about the 2 or 3 others with MS in the church that aren't being prayed for?
Yeah.
That's almost a guilt that is placed upon Carrie sometimes as she's being prayed over and she's looking out and here's 2 or 3 others in the church with the same disease and have the same issues and the same problems.
Some are worse off.
And some are worse off. But just because of position or who we are or who, and those are the things just to be aware of. Like, and sometimes you don't have to physically go to that person. You could just say, hey, just letting you know I'm praying for you. Or it's, you know what? Sometimes it's in the middle of the week and not on a Sunday morning that need to be reminded that people are praying. And it's a simple text message, you're on my heart, praying for you today.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of things to be aware of. And because you're passionate and you have the excitement because you're obedient in that prayer.
Yeah.
Sometimes that physically, because I do it when I speak, I start pacing back and forth and I get excited, and so those are the things that sometimes you have to kind of take a step back a little bit. And if you're going to lay on hands, do it gently.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not aware of your surrounding or how you approach. And those are just the things, like still in the healing, be careful of the sickness or physical ailment that person is going through.
Because when my mom was going through cancer, when she passed away, people are like, well, God didn't heal your mom. Like people, and you're like, no, He really did. It may not have been the healing that I wanted or that my dad or my sister wanted, but ultimately we knew that she was made completely whole. But when you're praying for someone who has has gone through something like a breast cancer type surgery, I would just ask, if there's a lady in your church, be so gentle with them because they are hurting so much physically. Their body, what they're like, you can't lift your arms and there's different things. And so you have to almost please know, you almost have to feel like you need to make an announcement from the platform, and you hope you don't have to do that, but just knowing that, just being aware that you don't know how they feel. You don't know at that particular moment, how their body feels, and it can be just a slight little touch of, But just being cautious and aware that you don't need to like
and that's
force them down or.
I would say I think everybody in general has great intentions, good intentions.
Absolutely.
And so we're not saying don't do this. There's power in healing.
Yeah.
And so let that power be in the healing. So when you approach somebody for that prayer and healing, approach them with the love.
Yeah. Gentleness.
Let God have the power.
Yeah.
But love the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And see where God takes that.
I mean, he did say that he would wipe away every tear from our eyes when we meet him. So we are going to be okay. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Wes, Carrie, I would like for you guys to talk, because both of you, Carrie, you're a caretaker, and Wes, you said that you worked in college to bring forth change in your school for people like me, people with disabilities. I'd like you just to go into that a little bit, a couple minutes, and how has that impacted how you see the world, working with people with disabilities, or working for the rights for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to understand we still live in a world, Michael, where individuals that are born in other countries, like that are born with diseases like what you have, Michael, that they're put to death as babies. I mean, that's the reality of the world that we do live in. Luckily, we're in America, and that's not so. But we do live, even people who don't struggle with a learning disability or diseases, most people are struggling with their purpose. And then you add something on top of that where society looks at diseases and ailments as disabilities. It limits the possibility of having purpose in this world. That's what the world says. But God created us each day with a plan and a purpose. So, and his plans and purposes are greater than ever. So I think what we've learned is that everybody has a purpose. And for me, I want to know what your purpose is. Why did God create you today? Why are you alive today? And if I could be a part of discovering what that plan and that purpose is for today and hearing why God has you alive today, oh my gosh, how incredible is that? And I have found that just to be true. There are a lot of people that come to church that will sit in a service, they'll be encouraged, they love God, but they're waiting for the day that they die because they don't see a purpose for their life today. And I think it's I think as a pastor, it's our responsibility. It's a responsibility is to help people and guide people of understanding what their plan and purpose is. And it's not us telling what it is, but it's help providing opportunities for individuals to figure that out. And that's that personal relationship with Jesus. And it's what I appreciate with Carrie is that a lot of people don't see her struggles each morning and at night. And then she goes out there and she lives every day being a wife, a mom, a caregiver, pastor's wife, all those things. And physically, she feels it late at night, but yet she wakes up each day going, okay, here's a new day. And I think that's no different than anybody else, depending if they have a disease or not. We gotta live life like that. And that way, when we put our head on our pillow at night, we go, was it Benjamin Franklin used to wake up every day? Maybe Michael, you could help me with this. Benjamin Franklin used to wake up every day saying, who can I help today? And then he goes to bed.
I can't, but
said, who have I helped today? And, I think that's I like to say I've changed that in my life of what is my purpose today, and have I fulfilled my purpose today?
Wes, wasn't it true that during college you helped? Uh,
Oh,
that was my actual
okay.
question. I was like, this is
Yeah.
good. I'm gonna let him talk, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, one of the things that when I was going through all of that in college with my learning disability is um,
Resource Center.
figuring out that if a education uh, organization, structure, college, school receives financial aid, they have to have a learning center. And our school did not have a learning center. So there was no place that I could go and take my tests, get help communicate from me to my professors and that kind of thing. There was no resources for anyone on the campus with a learning disability. And so by the end of that second semester, my freshman year, so I found out I had dyslexia spring break shortly after. And by May, we had a learning center on the school campus with someone that was hired to help.
That's good. That's good. Let's move time forward a little bit. So, like I said in the beginning, you guys were my pastors at Pendleton, associate pastors under head pastor current Phil Kearney for 4 years.
Yeah.
How did that come apart? How did that come apart? And how did that come along? And what did you learn from that experience in those 4 years?
Yeah, so we were youth led missionaries. So our mission field was the middle schools, high schools of Oregon and Idaho. I was connecting churches to the local school campuses and helping teenagers start Christian clubs, those kind of things. And we were doing school assemblies. And I thought I was going to do that for the rest of my life. Anytime that we've moved, our plan was to never move. And that was Klamath Falls. That was Albany with missions. And then Pastor Phil called me up. He heard that I was coming through Pendleton on my way home from Idaho, and he goes, "Hey, you want to stop by Pendleton and have coffee with me?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." I was thinking we were going to talk about graduation because we always help produce the high school graduation there, and I thought that's what we were going to talk about. And he just started talking about his heart and the direction of the church, and he wanted to know if there was anybody that would fit a lead associate position, if I knew anybody. And I said, and I threw out a couple names, and he goes, "Well, what about you?" I was like, "Oh," and he goes, "No, seriously, like you would fit well." And I told him, I said, "Well, I'll pray about it." And he goes, and
when he wanted you to oversee like youth.
Yeah, and at that moment was to help oversee youth. Pastor Zach, who became the youth pastor, he was kind of moving in that direction into ministry. And I didn't step out into the mission field to be a youth pastor. And I felt like Pastor Zach already had the giftings and the relationships just to step in and be that youth pastor. Yeah. And so we spent some time of just about a year or so, just kind of.
I don't think it was a year. I think it was like.
And I didn't feel like we were released from Youth Alive yet.
Well, yeah.
And it was about less than a year later.
Yeah, because I was kids pastor.
Yeah, and I reached out to Pastor Phil and I said, "Hey, if you're still thinking about bringing on somebody, maybe we could open up talks again. We're kind of feeling that lead." He goes, he didn't really say it this way, but it was almost like, "Well, it's about time." But I honestly, Pastor Phil, the church and the community is just one that always loved Pendleton, loved the church, had many years of history with the church and youth pastors, and Pastor Phil is just one of those pastors that you just go, if he whatever he says, you need to listen to. And so just really valued the 4 years that we had sitting under his leadership.
Almost 4.
Yeah, just almost 4. and part of it was he has his story that he could share. I just felt like where the church was pre-COVID and where we were going, he wanted to remove a lot of stuff off his plate so he could lead the church from out front in a direction. I mean, at that point, I think we were 400, 450. The church doesn't hold that much in the sanctuary. We were crammed, and we definitely didn't want to go to 2 services because it would stretch our leadership. Yeah. And so we were thinking remodel, that kind of stuff. And so, but shortly after we moved there, we had a huge flood in that area and had Samaritan's Purse for about 6 weeks. We hosted at our church, helping out flood victims and damage and cleanup. And then that went right into COVID. Literally, we were trying to get Samaritan's Purse back into their homes, which is all over the country as COVID was entering into Umatilla County. And, the first case of COVID was in our county. And there was just, we wanted to make sure that they all got home. And so we went straight from a flood right into COVID and having to shut COVID down and our churches and figure out what ministry looks like, that kind of thing. So walking through natural disaster to pandemic, and then taking a stand on certain things as well, but readjusting ministry. During that time, we rewrote the church's mission statement and
so what it currently is still.
And so but some of the things that came out of that was moving Celebrate Recovery from Thursday night to replacing our Sunday night service that reached the whole family. So from birth all the way through adults, had something for every age group. And, 120 people on a Sunday night, it was a really cool experience. Learned so much from Pastor Phil, how to approach, but the importance of earning trust with your people, and how to navigate that as well, was vital. And, thought that we wouldn't leave. He retired, and so we knew that if we weren't the lead pastors at Pendleton First, then we needed to be the lead pastor someplace else, and that took us to Medford, which didn't pan out how we thought it would. So you want to talk about church hurt?
We'll get there. Let's
get it right. Slow down.
Let's slow down.
No, with Pendleton, just great experience and great people and great community, and just really enjoyed our time there. Yeah.
You were the pastors technically because the board did appoint you the interim pastors during the transition between Pastor Phil and the current pastor at Pendleton First. How was that experience, and how was that experience leading a church that you knew you would have to step out eventually?
Yeah, it was. I will say this: the one thing that I learned the most was when, in a transition, there's a mantle that the lead pastor carries, and insights that nobody else does, not even as a lead associate. You have just a different insight if you're in tune to it as a lead pastor. Let me just clarify that, because I think there's lead pastors that are just out there. But if you're in tune to the Holy Spirit, there's a mantle and some clarity and insights that you see before they happen. And those 6 months that I was interim pastor, I would say everything that took place in that 6 months, meetings that I had, I was not surprised by. And I kept on, for 6 months, I kept on telling Carrie, in fact, even after that, after we even moved here to Medford, I always told Carrie, I was like, man, I should have trusted myself. And she goes, yeah. And I learned in those 6 months to trust the discernment that I have, and what God's telling me. And I definitely, I learned that. and that it's not my ministry, it's God's. And to keep my character and integrity in every decision I make, and just want to be obedient.
Yeah.
So you kind of mentioned it before. You were appointed to a church in Medford for about 6 weeks.
6 weeks, 4 Sundays.
I'd like you to briefly. You can share as much as you want. It doesn't matter to me. Just go into, like you said, church hurt. Just expound on that, sir.
This is so we were appointed. It's a great church, great people. Appointed lead pastors, and I went into it with my own insecurities. I think it was something that every leader struggles with, and has to overcome. So in those insecurities, I did, because when you walk into a church, at least for me, I'll say this for me, I want to know why people have chose that church to make it their church. Yeah. And so I walked into a church just kind of wanting to observe and learn the people and build the relationships. And as a lead pastor, not knowing the direction where they've been or where we're going. I mean, you could have a vision, but if it doesn't align with the DNA of the church, it's going to miss. And so I jumped in and Win the Day series. It's a book by Mark Batterson. And so I started a sermon series based off of that. And if you know anything about Mark Batterson, which I have an email from him, but if you know anything about Mark Batterson and you do any research, he wants people to use his stuff.
Yeah.
And the board accused me of plagiarizing. But they had 2.5 weeks where they were talking amongst and I would say it's probably maybe 3 or 4 that kind of spearheaded the conversation before they even approached me about it. And and I leaned heavy on Mark Batterson stuff the first 2 weeks, and then I started doing my own stuff with a little bit of his stuff. The last 2 times I preached there. All that to say is there was just some strong leadership, and they did not feel like they could move forward with me any longer. And so I could either, according to the structure that we have in our bylaws with the Assemblies of God, I could be forced to vote. But I told the board, I said, we could either fight the enemy, because the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And this is an attack from the enemy to divide leadership. We could either fight the enemy together, but if we're not all on the same page, then I'm going to fight it for my family. And I would say that's another thing that I learned from my parents. And so there was people that couldn't move forward. And so I said, so I guess you have my letter of resignation. And that was it. And we've been in Medford ever since. What I found is I'm still pastoring in Rogue Valley, in the Medford area, with people who will never step foot in church. And if I was still pastoring at that church, I would have probably never crossed paths with them. And so I've learned to live. That's live in the moment, right? What's my purpose for today? It's who is God bringing across my path to have conversation with and live with. And, for the moment, this is where we're at. And just still seeking what God has for us. But like I said, it's a good church, good people in the church. Just like any church, there's Yeah, just strong leadership. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Mhm.
But what are you doing? Like you kind of went into it, but what are you guys doing now?
Yeah.
I'm a caregiver still. I started when we were in Pendleton, working with the Sagermans with Nick. He is the joy, and I just adore him completely. I will say now, and I will say it till the day that he is no longer here or I'm not, that I'm his favorite. So if they're watching, they'll know that I did that because I mean it. So they offered me the opportunity to come in and work and help Nick and help with Nick. And so when I moved here, I wasn't obviously going to continue because the demands that would be on that I would put on myself, not the church, but I would put on myself. Um, I wouldn't be able to do it. So, but knowing that I needed to, I just registered. I reached out to Naomi and said, "How do I do this? How do I move on to a new county?" And I met a great family. Probably, I think in August, I is when I connected with them. I spend every Friday with this client. He's had a traumatic brain injury in 2015. And he's autistic and he is a joy. Um, I absolutely look forward to my Fridays because he is just a delight. And they're a wonderful Christian family. I just recently lost a client. I'm still on call, but I don't work full time for or part time with him anymore. But another young man, a great family that loves Jesus, an autistic man, young man. So I work with people with intellectual or developmental disabilities, and it could be any age. I just happen to always land with some adults, and so. That's been what I'm doing. That's with a different company, but that's what I started doing. I've always had a heart for people with special needs. Um, I can think back to Texas when we were in a small home missions church, and I don't remember his name, but I can see him as plain as day. And he would always smile and couldn't look me in the eye. And he just would come shake my hand and he'd say, "God bless you. God bless you." And I loved him. He was just the most precious person. Um, but, I I look at it as not really a job. It's been such a ministry to be a part of their lives. Um, working with them on a daily basis. Um, my responsibilities are much different with these guys than it was with Nick. But I really, I mean, I love them and I love doing what I get to do. Um, it's just looking a little different right now till I find another client. So I just have my Friday client. So, which I met with today. And so we had a blast.
Yeah, so I found myself in a special education class, elementary. So I'm a teacher's aide in an elementary classroom for first and second graders. I think this year we have 3 kindergartners in our class coming up. So about 13 students. I actually started off subbing in that class, and the district was involved in that class because it was some major behavioral issues. That's the majority, the structure of our class is kids with behavioral issues and trying to get them to start doing some academics. And so I've been in elementary school this past school year, going into this year. I've been officiating basketball, but the main thing right away that I did, what I did right after what happened to us at the church is I started a ministry called Unhindered Faith. And because unhindered was the word that I thought was going to be the theme for that church in 2024. And when all that happened, I was like, my first thought was like, well, there goes that theme. And then I was like, wait a minute, no, God gave me that word for a reason. Now I need to walk it out. And so that's where we came up with Unhindered Faith, of realizing that our faith doesn't have to be hindered by the situations that we go through, because God's not. And doesn't mean that we don't feel it. It just means that our faith isn't weak. And so And then I invested in myself, in my own personal growth and journey, and being a better leader and understanding who I am and where I want to go. And so I invested in myself financially with John Maxwell, and and so we've been doing leadership classes through Zoom, and which, Michael, you've been a part of, and I appreciate it. And but we've been walking through some of John Maxwell's leadership training stuff and offering that to churches and staff, or even businesses, corporations, or one-on-one coaching. And then which is provided some opportunities of potential teacher in service coming up in the next month, of doing some teacher in service in public schools. And so looking forward to that. And then just filling in pulpits. I've been traveling, speaking at different churches, and helping out pastors take some time off. And I found myself on the rodeo Bible camp circuit this year. So,
That's right.
Went from Pendleton, which we've been a part of there. It's middle school, high schoolers. And I've always been kind of like the pastor that's been on site for volunteers in Pendleton. And the very last day there in Pendleton, the directors for the one up in Washington asked if I would be the speaker for the campers. And so it's been another week up in Washington with my daughter, and just enjoyed it. And looks like I got 2 rodeo Bible camps every summer that I'm going to now.
You mentioned John Maxwell. Like you said, I have been a part of those Zoom calls. I want you to, because there is this stigma against self-help and tools and stuff like that, and I'd like you to expound on why that, self-help and what John Maxwell does with self-growth and leadership. I want you to expound on why that's important, even if it doesn't have that religious, Jesus-y sounding, Christian-y sounding language. Why is that important?
So I think the church has, I don't know if they've necessarily verbalized it, or you just have some spiritual leaders that have abused it, whether if it's, the self-help, but I think there's a fine line. But God gives you gifts. It's our responsibility to cultivate those gifts. And that's the one thing that John Maxwell really emphasizes. We're nothing without the gifts that God has given us. So we need to cultivate what that is. It's if he also calls there's the law of the rubber band. You're at point A and you want to get to point B. There's a tension that's in there, but a lot of people are just stuck at A. There's and not realizing you have to put effort into your own growth. Now, God is the one that allows it to grow, but your responsibility for continuing to plant the seeds and water it, and God will nurture that and let it grow, and it will expand who you influence. And realizing and this is what I love about Celebrate Recovery. You learn right away you can't help other people. As much as, Michael, you're involved with John Maxwell in our Zoom groups, I can't change you.
Right.
Only you can. So you can sit there and listen all day long. Doesn't mean that you're actually applying anything to it. And so those are the things that that's where we come at with that personal growth. You have to desire that culture of constantly wanting to grow and be better so that you could influence more. It's also seeing the value in others. If you see value in others, that means I need to be better to continue to add value in others.
Right. Well, now that we're nearing the end of the recording session, I'd like to thank you both. And for those that don't know, when they were still pastors at the church, we had this thing called Pendleton First Studies. And I was a part of that because I have the desire. I am a pastor. I've been telling myself that recently, even though I don't have the title yet. The title is meaningless, in my opinion, but I am a pastor. I am a leader. But thank you, Wes, because because I really struggled with the first couple. Because what Pendleton First Studies was just college courses, basically a Bible college that was offered by the church. It was college courses on the Bible, and I struggled with the first couple tests, and you saw me, and you were like, let's fix that. And so we basically treated it like I was in high school. You took me into your office each test, and we went question by question. And when if I finally do get the title, you are going to be in my acceptance speech or whatever you call that. And because you have been a great influence on me, and I thank you both for doing this.
Well, Michael, it's been absolutely amazing to see
your
journey and where you're at, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of it. That's what's beautiful about a relationship with Jesus, is that our family gets bigger, but it gets tighter, if we allow it. So,
well, thank you again, and thank you for watching the Cornerstone podcast, where we point people to the Cornerstone one story at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.